Hello and welcome to my channel on YouTube. In this my first video, I want to respond to a guy called Muhammad Ali. He has a channel where he calls himself the Muslim Lantern. I decided to make this video after seeing him repeatedly make false claims in various videos. Unfortunately, many Dawah people just repeat things they hear and read secondhand, things which are sometimes not accurate and sometimes completely false. Usually this is out of ignorance because most of them, to be honest, cannot directly access the Islamic sources and they just rely on intermediate sources that filter, hide and sugarcoat the facts. However, when I came across this Muslim Lantern guy, especially in his response to a question on the topic of slavery in Islam, I noticed a level of dishonesty that seemed straight out intentional, like it was a habit or a profession for him. I thought to myself, I've had enough of people peddling false information, especially when I know for sure it is blatantly false. So I decided to make this video for people to see the dishonesty and deception. Let's jump right into Muslim Lantern's video, just about where he starts his answer by completely denying that in Islam there is such a thing as slavery.
Now let's deal quickly with this couple of questions that you have. First, the idea of slavery. There's no such thing as slavery in Islam. There isn't such a thing as slavery in Islam.
As we heard, this guy very clearly denied there even being such a thing as slavery in Islam. When I heard this, I thought, how is he going to deny a practice thoroughly written about, explained in Islamic sources and practiced throughout Islamic history? Now, most Dawah guys or imams would admit that slavery existed and was practiced at the time of the Prophet, but they would claim that Islam had come to slowly abolish it, and they would also downplay or hide the various allowed ways of gaining new slaves. Or they would claim that slaves were not treated so bad. However, Muslim Lantern takes a novel approach, completely denying such a thing as slavery in Islam, even though he recognizes what slavery is. Now, since slavery is found clearly in the Quran, the hadiths, in the reported practices of the early Muslims, and in the books of Islamic law, I think he is simply being deceptive and dishonest. And because of that, he will be contradicting himself all over the place. And that's what we will see in this video. Let's continue and hear how he arrived at his wild claim.
Prophet ﷺ, he said explicitly in a hadith, do not say abdi or amati. You cannot say abdi, you cannot say my slave. So he prohibited us from using that term because slavery, in the sense of the word that everyone understands, if you go now Google slavery, for instance, you'll see definitions saying that you own a human being, for instance.
The first thing he does is to quote from part of a hadith, and from it he completely makes up his own false understanding, contrary to what this hadith is cautioning against. And this will come back to bite him when I shortly show what so many hadiths say. But for now, let's note two things: that he admits the Arabic words abdi and amati mean my slave, and also his false claim that it is prohibited to say these words. Why? Because according to him, slavery doesn't exist in Islam. Okay, let's hear him out and see him elaborate on why he denies there is such a thing as slavery.
Sense of the word that everyone understands. If you go now Google slavery, for instance, you'll see definitions saying that you own a human being, for instance. You own a human being, you have a position, an owning of that person, and then you have forced labor on that individual. You have forced labor. You force that person to do labor. You lash them. They have no dignity. That does not exist in the religion of Islam at all. Okay? So you take someone who's free, after you take them, you kidnap them and then you enslave them. That's what slavery is. You take a free person, you kidnap them, you enslave them, they become your property, you have forced labor on them, you head them, you do all of it. That is a definition of what everyone understands with the word slavery, and that does not exist in Islam.
So we just heard a list or a definition with a brief elaboration of what slavery is. And remarkably, he clearly denied all of these points being found in Islam, when in fact the complete opposite is true. Even by doing a basic investigation, it is abundantly clear that slavery exists in Islam. The best way to expose Muslim Lantern's false claims is to show what the Islamic sources say, and I don't even need to show tens or hundreds of references, but just from the first few that I will bring here, you will see how much misinformation this Muslim Lantern promotes. So let's jump right in and mention a few hadiths. The first hadith is from Sunan an-Nisa'i, number 4621. I will leave links to all the references in the description below, or you can go online and search the hadith. I've brought it up here with the Arabic from the popular website sunnah.com. We read under the book of financial transactions a very interesting chapter header called Selling Animals for Animals of Different Amounts or Quality Hand to Hand. The hadith says, "A slave came and gave his pledge to the Messenger of Allah to emigrate, and the Prophet did not realize that he was a slave. Then his master came looking for him. The Prophet said, 'Sell him to me.' So he bought him for 2 black slaves. Then he did not accept any pledge from anyone until he had asked, 'Is he a slave?'" So the hadith is very clear in what is happening. It spells it out that slaves are being bought and sold by the Prophet. The Prophet himself, he had slaves, and 2 of them were given away for 1 as slaves. And it seems that the value of black slaves, at least here, was worth less.
There is no such thing as slavery in Islam.
This hadith alone exposes Muslim Lantern as spreading misinformation, including his wordplay that we cannot say abd. Yet, not only are slaves being bought and sold, but the word abd is used multiple times. For example, when the narrator says abdain aswadain, 2 black slaves, and including from the Prophet's own mouth, we read the word abd. So Muslim Lantern's claim is false. Now, I could also mention here the dignity that 2 slaves being sold for 1 is classified under financial transactions of animals of different quality. But perhaps it's a one-off mistake that one hadith scholar made in titling and categorizing this in his hadith book. So let's go to Sahih Muslim, hadith number 1602. He has a similar chapter titled The Permissibility of Selling Animals for Animals of the Same Kind and of Different Quality. Let's see which animals were being referred to. And what do you know? It's a slave being bought for 2 black slaves by the Prophet of Islam. And again the word abd, meaning slave, appears in the Arabic. So Muslim Lantern is not truthful when he said,
There isn't such a thing as slavery in Islam. Cannot say abdi, cannot say my slave. So he prohibited us from using that term.
In the next hadith, this time it's the Prophet's wife Aisha and her slaves, where she orders that one of her slave girls be sold, and not only sold, but it says to be sold to the worst of the Arab masters. I have brought up the hadith here. This is from Al-Adab al-Mufrad of Imam al-Bukhari. Hadith number 162. The category title gives it away, which is being a master. What is interesting to find mentioned, but no surprise, that there were very bad slave masters among the Arabs. But what we learn is that in Islam, if you are unhappy with your slave, you can, as Aisha did, sell them to the worst of masters. So they could obviously be mistreated or whatever else was done to slave girls. And also note, the word used in Arabic for the slave girl in the hadith, it is ama. The same word which Muslim Lantern said means slave, and he claimed that we cannot use it because there is no such thing as slavery. Again, I'm exposing the false narrative that this Muslim Lantern is spewing, while the sources of Islam say otherwise. In the next hadith, this time collected and classified by the hadith scholar Ibn Majah, hadith number 2272, under the section of business transactions. He also has a chapter titled Selling Animals for Animals of Different Kinds, Hand to Hand. Now there seems to be a familiar pattern in these different books of hadith, but let's see which animals were being traded as business transactions. We read that the Prophet bought Safiya for 7 slaves. In the Arabic, it clearly says, أن النبي اشترى صفية, that the Prophet bought Safiya. Now this Safiya was the beautiful young daughter of a tribal chief who had just been unalived and his tribe conquered. However, Safiya had already been taken by another fighter, and she was now his property to enjoy. So if the Prophet wanted her as his 10th wife, he had to first buy her from the man who owned her, and they agreed to trade her for 7 slaves. You can make a note of these hadiths to bring up and challenge those who are ignorant or deceptive when it comes to this topic. Anyway, so far we've seen the Prophet buying slaves. Do we find him selling slaves, selling abds? Of course we do, and that is why this Islamic preacher is so untruthful. In Sahih al-Bukhari 2534, we read that the Prophet found out that a particular slave was to be set free, but that his owner had no other property. So he called for that slave, and we see, you guessed it, he sold him. In the Arabic, we clearly see the word abd, and we see it mentioning that the Prophet sold him. Then we read in Sahih Muslim, hadith number 997c, more details of this sale, how much the slave was sold for, and who the Prophet sold him to. It clearly states the Prophet saying, "Who will buy him from me?" And a person called Nu'aym bought him for 800 dirhams. The practice of slavery is well covered in the sources of Islam, and while other Islamic preachers admit slavery was allowed and practiced, they would downplay and cherry-pick hadiths to put slavery in a good light. However, I found Muslim Lantern's discussion on slavery in his video to be full of dishonesty and untruths. Here are a couple more hadiths where the Prophet confirms that slaves are property like animals. In Sunan Abi Dawood, hadith number 4063, the Prophet asks a poor-looking man if he has any property. The man says yes. The Prophet asks, what kind? The man says he has camels, sheep, horses, and slaves. And the Prophet affirms these as property in his response. In another hadith, such as the one in Musnad Ahmad, we learned that the Prophet relieved the people from having to pay tax on horses and slaves. So if you own a horse or a slave, you don't have to pay the zakah tax on them, while on other goods you had to. These last 2 hadiths make it clear that slaves were seen as property, like a horse or other animals that someone owns. I could continue giving references after references showing the idea and practice of slavery, people being bought and sold as property, slave girls being bought from marketplaces, swapped, gifted, used for male gratification, women and children chased down, captured, and then enslaved, including slaves being beaten and even unalived by their masters for simply running away. And I will bring them here for people to be aware. But from the few hadiths that I brought here, the claimed idea that there is no such thing as slavery in Islam is clearly a falsehood and an indication of the level that Muslim Lantern will go to make up stuff. In my next video, I will continue with part 2, reacting to Muslim Lantern's video discussing his denial of slavery and expose his continued misinformation and deceptions, his attempted wordplay, and his contradictions, misquotes of verses and hadiths. If there are particular matters of the practiced slavery in Islam that you would like me to show you the Islamic teachings for, or you would like me to address a specific hadith, then comment below and I will endeavor to respond.